All right, so I gave us a new page here at the end. You might do for your presentation, like introduce the species briefly, point out the differences. And then we can take this bigger perspective of phylogenetics, morphological evolution, biogeography. And for that, we're going to need a tree. So I'm going to supply you with trees for the group you're working on. And they're going to be, they might be limited by what has data. And so you might not get all species represented on your phylogeny, but whatever you get, you should be able to work with. And these days, especially for, there was a project that got data for all the Wisconsin plants. So that'll be nice to potentially use all those. I'm going to do just a little cosmetic thing here. I'm going to paste on a background because this image goes right up to the edges. So make a white background, control click here and do the order send backwards. So now I have actually two things. I've got a white box on the back and the image in the front. And if I hide them both with shift, I can then do control click and group them. And they become one thing. So I've just given myself a little bit of a margin on this image. It didn't have a margin before. You could highlight where your Wisconsin species are. That's probably a good start. So we have Sagittaria cuneata, and I'm going to do, I don't know, purple. And one option you can do, if you go into the, there's not an instant way to do it, but you can do a custom and then drag your transparency. So if I put a color box around this and then I make part of the color transparent, then the words are going to come through. So little trick there. So Sagittaria cuneata, brevirostra, latifolia. So 3 so far, and then cristata, montevidensis, graminea, super cool, and rigida. So everyone that we have in our project is actually represented on the tree here. And what about those other species? So I guess maybe first of all, I'll just keep using the same color so I don't take time to pull up another one. What we have here, for starters, okay, maybe I'll skinny that up a little bit. We have a group of these that have a common ancestor, single most recent common ancestor to 3 of the species, and at least as far as the species that have been sampled for this analysis, there's nothing else in the genus that's more closely related to them. So that's pretty interesting, and that's worth looking into in more detail. So cristata, graminea, montevidensis. If you remember, in an earlier video, Sagittaria cristata has been basically carved out of Sagittaria montevidensis. Is that right? Did I say that right? I'm going to check my book. Hold on. Alismatesi, Sagittaria. I think I had it backwards. Right. Sagittaria graminea is sometimes considered synonymous with Sagittaria cristata. And then we saw Sagittaria montevidensis sometimes has subspecies in it as well. So some interesting diversity here. And then we don't have the images up for these species, but maybe we'll be able to figure out what they have in common. So Sagittaria cristata, it's sort of a Great Lakes distribution. Sagittaria graminea, big on the Atlantic coastal plain, also Mississippi River. And then Sagittaria montevidensis, mostly Mississippi River. I guess a little bit in the Northeast here. So I don't know if there's a whole lot you'd say they have in common or patterns with their geography. They are kind of limited to North America, which is maybe handy. We could go to our key, cristata, graminea, montevidensis. Sagittaria montevidensis is one you get to by following this lead, and that's pretty far out from Sagittaria graminea, Sagittaria cristata. Those two species, though, pretty close together. Those are the ones that are sometimes considered to be the same species, right? So offhand, I'd say there's probably a lot of features in common between Sagittaria cristata and Sagittaria graminea. And maybe you could do some research and find out what is more similar, what would make Sagittaria montevidensis fall in with those. Sagittaria rigida, pretty far removed, most distant related to the rest of the species. It had the range that is still northern North America. And then this group, not strictly monophyletic, but depending, there might be some some phylogenetic uncertainty here, could potentially mean that they might share a common ancestor. So Sagittaria cuneata, brevirostra. We saw brevirostra here, kind of a middle of the continent. Sagittaria cuneata, western, that's interesting. And what's the other one? Latifolia, pretty widespread. Another perspective you could get on here, maybe it's important, maybe it'll be useful to fill it in. Shrink that down, I guess. Blink. We could look at who else is on here. So Sagittaria natans, where is this species? Northern Europe. So you probably would end up making some notes somewhere else about this kind of information, but Northern Eurasia. Biologically, I like Eurasia better than Europe and Asia. Trifolia. Okay, so that's that's an interesting part of the distribution. I'd say maybe more likely, call that coastal. It's sort of more coastal, tropical, Eastern Asia. All right. I'm not sure I should call it tropical, but we'll leave it on there for now. Sagittaria, Sagittafolia. Ooh, interesting. More like a northwest Eurasia. This one was like a northeast Eurasia. So kind of minor patterns. I don't know if that's so important. We're not, you know, it's still Eurasia. That's useful. If we're jumping, you know, jumping oceans, that's important. Leishmanensis, this one, from the name, you might guess this has a Chinese distribution, and so we have. So let's put China on there, keep that simple. Potamagida, also China, look at that. The same deal, so I'll just copy and paste that down here. Sagittaria pygmea distribution. Hey, look at that. So we'll just say Eastern Asia for that, but of course also including China. All right, we'll call it Asia. Europe and Asia connected, one big continent. Tengsunensis, I'm going to say also China. Not strictly China, I guess that, I don't know all of my countries. That's not all China there. Wait, they'll tell you. China, South Central, East Himalaya, Nepal, Tibet. Okay, so we have a pretty strong indicator of a Asian ancestor here, probably. And then global distribution, these were Sagittaria brevirostra, cuneata, latifolia. Oops, those didn't come up. Those are all in the Americas. So you could sort of color code over here and say we have probably an ancestor in Eurasia. So this ties in with the biogeography lab that we did. You can put these into floristic realms if you wanted to, or just do kind of a broad continental scale is pretty effective. Those realms were basically continents anyway. Just a little curious, maybe we'll just jump around here and see. All right, so Sagittaria issotiformis is Southeast USA. Lancifolia, distribution similar. Phylogeny, Eastern USA. Platyphila, I believe, is a United States plant. Great. Guianensis, probably Guyana. Oh, interesting. Okay, so Guianensis is pretty widespread. And pretty much in the tropics. And it's a distant relative to all kinds of other species on here. We could, sorry, I didn't take thorough notes on that, but let's say we had all. Take your time when you're doing your project. USB. Okay, so this, do some different colors on there. Do blue, and then we'd have down here an ancestor. So the common ancestor of all of this business, and actually probably farther out, things descended from here are, oh dear. Americas. So I don't know the easiest way to highlight this, but you could sort of draw on the branches here and say we have this group of species that were had ancestors in the Americas, mostly North America, got there from potentially from an ancestor in the tropics, although having just this one species here doesn't make that as strong. We'd have to check at these other species as well. But moving into North America, and then a branch here, a branch there, a branch there, having three successive branches also in the Americas really speaks strongly, if you wanted to do a biogeography reconstruction, would strongly support an ancestor in the Americas, and then up here probably shift into Eurasia for the ancestor here. We have descendants in China, Eastern Asia, Northern Eurasia, and then that would be a secondary move back to the Americas for these species. So as far as the amount of evolutionary time and maybe morphological diversification that has happened between these groups, we've got one group of pretty closely related species, one group of monophyletic species, independently ending up in North America, and then back here a much more distant relative also in North America. So it's kind of handy. You might expect, if you're looking at your morphology, you might expect these to group with morphology in a way that highlights that difference. And maybe we can do one last thing and just kind of group them. I'm just going to do like a hypothesis investigation and just put these into groups. So cuneata, brevirostra, latifolia, cristata, multividensis graminea. And so I can sort by their groups here. I'll put them in colors. And if you wanted to think maybe there was a difference among these that was phylogenetically useful, could go through here and look for it. Rhizomes, corms. So this one species, Sagittaria gramineae, is standing out from the others for a few things. Absent stolons, absent corms, but it's not a distant relative that would make you think that it's a big deal. Submersed leaves, present here, so that's not really a phylogenetic pattern to that. Floating leaves, only one species. Immersed leaves, pretty common. We got sagittate leaves, maybe a little bit more. This might be our best signal so far, but it's still a lot of fuzziness, all right? So sagittate is possibility for all the species in that group, but also linear to sagittate. And then a couple down here in other groups have possibility of having sagittate leaves as well. So sagittate is that arrowhead shape. Inflorescences, racemes or panicles, 1 to 15. Yeah, big ranges of values. Nothing's jumping out at me. Peduncle size. Here we got. Those need to be carried over. Bracts, connate, rooting pedicels, ascending, spreading, cylindric. Boy, that's a tough group to diagnose. Flower size. One really big, two mediocre, one really small. I mean, that'd be useful. This giant, oh, those are millimeters, never mind. Why you got one in millimeters? I'm gonna switch that. So it's 2.5 millimeters becomes centimeters. I mean, centimeters. Sepals recurved. Filaments dilated. Cylindric. Pistillate. Pedicellate. Not super helpful, my goodness. All right, well, we're looking for patterns that support our phylogeny. I don't think I'm seeing hardly anything. Yeah, okay, so we had one, what was our one? Potentially sagittate leaves. And, sometimes you report on what you got. So, so maybe I'll clean this up and put it into a more final presentation and give you an example of the presenting part of this. But for now, I think that probably goes through most of the parts of putting your data together and gathering images, making those useful. Yeah. Hopefully you're having some good luck putting your presentation together.